I never thought a plastic bag blowing in the wind would change everything. But that Tuesday morning in November, when the cold Ohio air bit through my jacket as I walked to school, I watched my mom bend down to pick up another piece of trash near the Speedway gas station on Maple Street. The frost made the pavement slippery, and her breath came out in white puffs as she worked. The other kids pointed and whispered, "Again, there goes crazy Linda," I heard Sarah Jenkins say to her friends, loud enough for half the street to hear, still digging through garbage like some kind of homeless person. "My mom says she's probably on drugs or something." The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. My cheeks burned with embarrassment, and I pulled my hood up tighter, hoping nobody would connect me to the woman crouched by the dumpster. But I kept walking, my sneakers crunching on the scattered autumn leaves. Mom didn't hear them, or maybe she just pretended not to. She was focused on something else entirely, her weathered hands carefully sorting through what others saw as worthless junk. I could see the concentration on her face, the same look she got when she was balancing our checkbook or reading the bills. Every movement was deliberate, purposeful. She wasn't just picking up trash randomly, she was looking for specific things. Aluminum cans that were worth more, glass bottles that could be returned for deposits, copper wire that the scrapyard would buy. My name is Emma, and this is the story of how my mother went from being the neighborhood joke to teaching an entire town what dignity really means. It started 3 years ago when Dad lost his job at the steel plant. I remember that day clearly. He came home early, his hard hat under his arm and his lunchbox still full. His face was gray, older somehow, and when he told us the news, his voice cracked like it did when he was trying not to cry. The whole town of Millfield, Ohio was struggling. You could see it everywhere. Empty storefronts with for-lease signs that had been up for months. Houses with overgrown yards where families had just given up. And that feeling in the air that everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the next bad news. Half the factories had closed, and families were barely hanging on. The Hendersons next door lost their house. The Clarks moved in with relatives in Cleveland. Our mailbox was stuffed daily with final notices and past due warning. But instead of falling apart like so many others, Mom did something nobody expected. She started walking. I'll never forget the first morning I saw her getting ready. It was barely dawn, and she was in the kitchen lacing up her oldest pair of sneakers, the ones with holes that she'd covered with duct tape. She had Dad's work gloves, the heavy leather ones from his construction days, and she'd found an old shopping cart at a garage sale for $3. Every morning at 6 a.m., rain or shine, Mom would leave our small house on Elm Street with that cart and those gloves. She'd mapped out a route that took her through downtown, past the high school, around Memorial Park, through the nice neighborhood on Oak Street, and back home. It was exactly 4.5 miles, and she walked it in all kinds of weather. I watched her from my bedroom window some mornings, seeing her push that cart through snow drifts or hurry along in the rain with a plastic tarp over everything. "Emma, honey," she'd say when I complained about the embarrassment, "there's no shame in honest work. These streets are cleaner because of what I do." But I was 15, and all I could see was the way people looked at us. Miss Patterson, from next door, would peer through her lace curtains and shake her head when Mom wheeled her cart up our driveway. I could see her lips moving, probably telling her husband Harold about those people who were bringing down the neighborhood property values. The cashiers at the recycling center spoke to her like she was invisible, counting out her money without making eye contact and acting like she was bothering them by being there. And at school, I became known as the girl whose mom was the neighborhood trash lady. The whispers followed me everywhere. In the cafeteria, kids would make jokes about my gourmet garbage lunches. In gym class, someone would always find a way to mention how their mom saw my mom digging through dumpsters behind the movie theater. I started eating lunch in the library and taking different routes between classes, anything to avoid the stares and comments. The worst part was watching Dad. He'd sit in his old recliner, the brown one with the torn armrests that we couldn't afford to replace, staring at daytime TV shows he'd never cared about before. Game shows, soap operas, talk shows, anything to fill the hour. While Mom counted her daily earnings at the kitchen table, sorting coins into piles and smoothing out crumpled dollar bills, Dad would just sit there with this lost expression on his face. "I should be providing for this family," he'd mutter. running his hands through his graying hair. 32 years I worked at that plant. 32 years, and they threw me away like yesterday's newspaper. We're a team, Robert, Mom would say gently, her voice never losing its patience, even when he said the same thing for the 100th time. We do what we have to do. There's no shame in survival. But I could see the shame eating at him anyway. The way he wouldn't make eye contact with neighbors anymore. How he stopped going to his bowling league because he couldn't afford the weekly fee. The defeated way his shoulders slumped when Mom would announce she'd made $8.37 that day. Winter was always the hardest. The morning I'm telling you about, there was frost covering everything like a thin sheet of glass. Our old Honda had ice crystals on the windshield, and my breath came out in small white clouds that disappeared as soon as they formed. The temperature had dropped to 22 degrees overnight, and the sidewalks were treacherous with black ice. I was running late for my chemistry test, the one I'd been studying for all week, and I should have been focused on molecular structures and periodic table elements. But something made me look across the street toward the gas station. Mom was there, like always, but this time she wasn't moved. She was crouched down near the air pump, perfectly still, staring at something on the ground. Her shopping cart was beside her, half full of the morning's collection, but she'd abandoned it completely. This time was different though. Instead of her usual quick, efficient movements, she was frozen in place. Her face had gone completely white, whiter than the frost on the ground. And even from across the street I could see that her hands were shaking. Not from the cold. Mom never shook from the cold anymore. She was too used to it. But from something else entirely. Mom? I called out, forgetting about my test, and crossing the street without looking for traffic. The asphalt was slippery under my sneakers, and I nearly fell twice. Are you okay? What's wrong? She looked up at me with the strangest expression I'd ever seen on her face. Fear mixed with disbelief, like she'd stumbled across something that shouldn't exist. Her pupils were wide, and she was breathing in short, quick gasps that sent little puffs of steam into the cold air. Emma, she whispered, her voice so quiet I had to lean down to hear her. You need to see this, but don't touch anything yet. I walked closer, my heart beating faster with each step. There, partially hidden under a pile of wet leaves, fast food wrappers, and what looked like yesterday's newspaper, was a black leather bag, not a purse or backpack, but something that looked official and expensive. It had brass corners that had gone green with age, heavy stitching that spoke of quality craftsmanship, and a combination lock that was hanging open, broken. The bag was partially buried, like someone had tried to hide it or like it had been there for weeks, slowly getting covered by the natural accumulation of street debris. But there was something else, scratch marks on the leather, like someone had dragged it across rough pavement, and one corner was torn, revealing the thick padding inside. Should we open it? I asked, looking around, nervous. The gas station was busy with morning commuters getting coffee and filling their tanks before work. Normal people living normal lives, completely unaware that we were crouched next to what might be something life-changing. Mom's hands were still trembling as she reached for the bag. It was heavier than it looked, much heavier, and when she lifted it slightly, we could hear something shifting inside. Not just papers, but something substantial, something that made a distinctive sound like thick bundles being shuffled. We need to take this to the police, she said firmly, but her voice was shaking too. Right now. We can't just leave it here, and we can't. She trailed off because we both knew what she was thinking. We couldn't just ignore it either. But as we started walking toward the police station downtown, our boots crunching on the icy sidewalk, the first twist in our story happened. The bag's latch, probably weakened by weather and time, and whatever trauma had brought it to that gas station, suddenly popped open with a loud click. The sound made us both jump, and papers immediately started scattering in the cold November wind. I bent down quickly to help gather them, my chemistry test completely forgotten now. The papers were flying everywhere, some getting caught in the chain-link fence around the gas station, others tumbling across Maple Street into the morning traffic. But as I grabbed for a sheet that was about to blow into a storm drain, I saw something that made my heart stop. Money. Not just a few bills that might have fallen out of someone's wallet, but thick stacks of hundreds and fifties, held together with rubber bands that had started to deteriorate. More money than I'd ever seen in my entire life. more than I'd even imagined existed in one place outside of a bank. My hands were shaking, worse than Mom's now, as I picked up the scattered cash, trying to count it while also chasing papers that were blowing toward the busy street. Some of the bills were damp from the morning frost, and they felt strange in my fingers, substantial and foreign and almost unreal. "Oh my God, Mom," I breathed, my voice barely audible over the wind and the sound of cars passing by. "There's so much. There's stacks and stacks of it." We quickly gathered everything we could find, both of us looking over our shoulders like we were doing something wrong just by touching it. My backpack wasn't big enough, so we stuffed everything back into the leather bag, trying to make it look casual, like we weren't handling what looked like someone's life savings. Dad was in the kitchen making coffee when we burst through the door, both of us talking at once. "Slow down," he said. But his expression changed when Mom emptied the bag onto our dining room table. The silence that followed was the heaviest I'd ever experienced. Stacks of money covered our scratched wooden table, along with official-looking documents and what appeared to be some kind of business records. Dad picked up one of the stacks and flipped through it slowly. "This has to be at least $50,000, he said quietly. "Try 400,000, Mom replied, her voice barely a whisper. We all stared at each other. $400,000 was more money than our family had ever dreamed of having. It was enough to pay off our mortgage, buy Dad a new truck, send me to college, and still have money left over. "We have to turn it in," Mom said finally. "Are you crazy?" Dad exploded, startling both of us. "Linda, this could solve all our problems. All of them. We could get out of this town, start over somewhere new." "It's not ours, Robert. It was thrown away. You found it in the trash." I watched my parents argue, feeling torn between both sides. Part of me agreed with Dad. We'd struggled for so long, and here was a chance to change everything. But I also knew Mom was right. This money belonged to someone. The documents in the bag told a story. There were business receipts, bank statements, and what looked like accounting records for a local construction company called Martinez Brothers Construction. I'd heard of them. They'd been working on the new shopping center outside town. "Look at this," I said, holding up a deposit slip. "This money might belong to the Martinez family." Mom nodded. "Then that's where it needs to go." But Dad wasn't giving up. "Linda, think about Emma's future. Think about what this could mean for our family." The argument continued for hours. Dad paced around the kitchen, his voice getting louder and more desperate. Mom sat quietly at the table, occasionally sorting through the documents, but her mind was already made up. That evening, while Dad had gone for a walk to cool off, Mom made a phone call. "Hello, is this Mr. Martinez? This is Linda Thompson. I think I found something that belongs to you." The second twist came when Carlos Martinez arrived at our house an hour later. He was a big man with calloused hands and tired eyes, and when he saw the money on our table, he actually started crying. "I thought we were finished," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "My brother, Miguel, he was supposed to deposit this at the bank yesterday. It's our payroll money for the next month. 32 families depend on this." He explained how Miguel had been carrying the money to the bank when his truck broke down near the gas station. In the confusion of dealing with the tow truck and getting a ride, he'd left the bag on the ground. "We've been searching everywhere," Carlos continued. "We even offered a reward, but nobody came forward. I was going to have to let half my crew go." As he spoke, I watched my mother's face. There was no regret there, no second-guessing her decision. She looked peaceful in a way I hadn't seen in years. "There's something else," Carlos said, reaching into his jacket. "I know this doesn't make up for what you could have kept, but I want you to have the reward we posted." He handed Mom an envelope. Inside was $5,000. Dad, who had returned during Carlos's visit, stared at the envelope. It wasn't 400,000, but it was more money than we'd had at one time in years. After Carlos left, Dad sat down heavily at the table. "I'm sorry, Linda," he said quietly. "You did the right thing. You always do the right thing." Mom reached over and took his hand. "We'll be okay, Robert. We always are." But the third twist was just beginning. The next morning, when I was getting ready for school, Mom wasn't at the kitchen table counting recycling money like usual. Instead, She was on the phone, and she looked excited. "That was Carlos Martinez," she said when she hung up. "He wants to meet with us this afternoon." When we arrived at the Martinez brothers' construction office, Carlos wasn't alone. There was a woman with a camera and a man with a notepad. "Local reporters. Mrs. Thompson," the woman said. "We'd like to tell your story. What you did yesterday was remarkable." I felt my stomach drop. The last thing I wanted was more attention on our family, especially the kind that would make me stand out even more at school. But as the interview progressed, something unexpected happened. The reporter wasn't interested in making fun of Mom's trash collecting. She was genuinely impressed by Mom's honesty and integrity. In a time when so many people are struggling, the reporter said into her camera, "Linda Thompson's actions remind us that character isn't about what you have, but about who you choose to be." The story aired that evening on the local news. I sat on our old couch, cringing as they showed footage of Mom with her shopping cart, but also feeling something else. Pride, maybe. The fourth twist came the next day at school. Instead of the usual whispers and pointing, something different happened. Miss Rodriguez, my chemistry teacher, stopped me in the hallway. "Emma, I saw the news story about your mother last night. What an incredible woman." Throughout the day, other teachers made similar comments. Even some of the students who had been cruel before seemed to look at me differently. But the real change came when Sarah Jenkins, the same girl who had called my mom crazy just days before, approached me at lunch. "Emma, I owe you and your mom an apology," she said, looking genuinely uncomfortable. "I was really mean, and I'm sorry." It turned out that Sarah's own family had been struggling since her dad's hours got cut at the warehouse. She'd been taking out her frustration on others, especially those she saw as being worse off than her family. "Your mom is braver than any of us," Sarah continued. "She found a solution when things got hard, and she didn't let pride stop her from doing what needed to be done." The fifth twist happened 2 weeks later. Dad had been out looking for work every day since the news story aired, and his whole attitude had changed. Seeing Mom get recognized for her strength and determination had inspired him to keep trying. One afternoon, he came home with news. "I got a job," he announced, grinning from ear to ear. "Where?" Mom asked, setting down the mail she'd been sorting. "Martinez Brothers Construction." "Carlos offered me a position as a site supervisor. He said he wants people with integrity on his team." I looked at Mom, and she was smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. Not just happy, but proud. Proud of Dad, proud of herself, and proud of what our family had become through all the struggles. The job paid well, better than Dad's old position at the steel plant. Within a month, we had caught up on all our bills, and Dad was talking about taking a vacation for the first time in years. But Mom didn't stop her morning walks. "Why do you still do it?" I asked her one Saturday morning, as she laced up her walking shoes. "Dad has a good job now. We don't need the recycling money anymore." She looked at me thoughtfully. "Emma, I learned something important over these past few years. Taking care of our community isn't just about money. It's about taking pride in where we live." She was right. The streets along her route were noticeably cleaner than other parts of town. Shop owners had started waving to her as she passed. The recycling center workers greeted her by name and asked about her family. The sixth and final twist came 3 months later, at the annual Millfield Community Awards ceremony. I didn't even know Mom had been nominated for anything until Carlos Martinez called to tell us she'd won. The Community Service Award was presented at the high school auditorium on a warm spring evening. The same auditorium where I'd felt so much shame about our family's situation was now filled with people who had come to honor my mother. When her name was called, Mom walked across the stage with her head held high. She was wearing her best dress, the blue one she saved for church, and her hands were steady as she accepted the plaque. "Linda Thompson has shown us that true wealth isn't measured in dollars," the mayor said as he handed her the award. "It's measured in the positive impact we have on our community and the integrity we show in our daily lives." But Mom's acceptance speech was what really got to me. 3 years ago, when my family hit hard times, I could have given up, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. "Instead, I chose to find a way to contribute. Every can I collected, Every street I cleaned was my way of saying that this community matters to me. She paused, looking out at the audience, and I saw several people wiping their eyes. When I found that money a few months ago, returning it wasn't a hard decision. It was the same decision I make every morning when I choose to care for our town. We're all connected, and when we help each other, everyone benefits. The applause was thunderous. I looked around and saw faces I recognized from all over town. The cashier from the grocery store, my teachers, neighbors, even some of the kids from school who had been cruel before. As we walked out of the auditorium that night, a strange thing happened. Person after person stopped Mom to thank her, not just for returning the money, but for everything she'd been doing quietly for years. Miss Patterson, our neighbor who used to shake her head disapprovingly, took Mom's hands in hers. "Linda, I owe you an apology," she said. "I was so focused on judging what you were doing that I never appreciated why you were doing it." Similar conversations continued all the way to our car. I realized that Mom's story had given people permission to see past their own prejudices and recognize the value in what she'd been doing all along. The drive home was quiet, but it was a comfortable quiet. Dad reached over and squeezed Mom's hand, and I sat in the back seat, feeling something I'd never experienced before, complete pride in my family and who we were. "Mom," I said as we pulled into our driveway, "I want to start walking with you in the mornings." She turned around and smiled at me. "I'd like that, Emma. I'd like that very much." The next morning, as we walked our route together, I understood something that had taken me years to learn. Dignity isn't about what other people think of you. It's about knowing who you are and staying true to your values, even when it's difficult. We passed the gas station, where Mom had found the money, and she paused for a moment. "You know what the funny thing is?" she said, adjusting her gloves. "Everyone thinks the miracle was finding that money, but the real miracle was learning that we already had everything we needed. We had each other, we had our integrity, and we had a community that just needed time to see what was really important." As we continued our walk, picking up litter and greeting the shop owners who were opening their businesses, I realized Mom was right. The money had been a test, not a gift, and by passing that test, she'd gained something far more valuable than $400,000. She'd gained the respect of an entire community and taught her family what real wealth looks like. Now, 2 years later, Dad still works for Martinez Brothers Construction, and business is booming. I'm a senior in high school with a scholarship to Ohio State, partly funded by a community scholarship program that Carlos Martinez started in Mom's honor. And every morning, Mom and I still take our walk together. The streets of Millfield are cleaner, the community is stronger, and our family learned that sometimes the thing that makes you different is exactly what makes you extraordinary. People don't mock my mom anymore. Instead, they stop her on the street to thank her. Children wave from school bus windows, and new residents are told the story of the woman who keeps their neighborhoods clean. But the most important thing Mom taught me is this: true wealth isn't about what you accumulate, it's about what you contribute. And integrity isn't just doing the right thing when people are watching, it's doing the right thing especially when they're not. Every morning when we walk past that gas station, I'm reminded that life can change in an instant, but the changes that matter most aren't the ones that happen to you. They're the ones that happen because of the choices you make. One day at a time, one step at a time, one piece of trash at a time. My mom didn't just find $400,000 that day. She found something much more valuable. She found proof that the life she'd been living all along was exactly the right one.